How do you view India today as an investment destination?
India is an amazing is positioned this is an extraordinary time for India because let's face it, now if you think about the last 25 years, half of all global GDP growth came from China. China can't pull that off anymore. They're done. So the question is, who's next? And let's face it, there's only one candidate here. Can't be Brazil, it can't be, it can't be Eastern Europe. It has to be India simply because the numbers. It's not even something that India earned to get at the table. 1.5 billion people gives you a place at the table that no other country can have. It's well positioned, but it's not guaranteed, right? Things have to work right. And I think when I wrote about the Adani Group last year and people critique me saying, you're Indian, how can you say bad things about India? I said, I think it's precisely because I'm Indian that I want to push at what I call the weakest links in the India story. And in many ways, the Adani, fiasco, and I think it was vastly overblown by Hindenburg, because it is something that a lot of family groups in India do, pushes at the weakest links in the India story. The first is, I think that the many Indian companies face the problem of they value control. The part of the India story is a lot of Indian companies are still controlled by a family group, by an insider, by an individual who doesn't want to let go. And that can create negative consequences. That was, if you think about the shell companies that Adani used, it was for stupid reasons to keep under the 75%. Remember, if you own 74% of a company, you have complete control. What's this fixation about wanting to control 78% of the company? What's the extra 4% doing? But with control, you can never stop. The second is it's a country where I think bureaucrats, some of them are corrupt, but a lot of them just don't want to make decisions because you get all downside, no upside, right? Because you make a bad decision, people pounce on you. You make no decision, then nothing happens to you. So everything gets pushed through. The old days, it was just files being pushed through by bureaucrats. In the new days, it's digital files being pushed through. And India has an infrastructure problem. We all know it. You know it the minute you step out of this office because to get home, it takes you 4 times as long as it did 20 years ago and 10 times as long as it did 40 years ago. Why? Because the roads look exactly the same in Chennai, in the cities. I know the highways, have been upgraded. But when I go back to Chennai and I look at those roadways, they look exactly like the roads I grew up in the 1970s when there were, what, 1/20th the number of cars there. I mean, I'll confess, I don't much enjoy doing anything in India because everything becomes a production. Going to the restaurant becomes a 4-hour round trip, right? It's an hour and a half, and it's a 7-mile drive, but no, a 5-mile drive. You're stuck basically. There's an infrastructure problem. And if India wants to step into the breach, those problems need fixing. We know it. We all know it. I know the government tries, but this has got to be something that is more systemic. It's built into every level. And it's got to be done faster. And in fact, the final thing about the Indian system is you've got a legal system that's incredibly slow to act and a legal system that's incredible. And for any kind of organized functioning economy, you need a legal system that's not just effective but timely. So we know what the weak links are. They can be fixed. They'll need resources. And I think India, while its position, needs to work on its weakest links. Don't keep selling me that you have 1.5 billion consumers, that you have a middle class. I know that. That's your good side. I need to know what you're doing to work on your bad side, the side that is getting in the way of being the next great growth engine for the world. But I think India is uniquely positioned to be that growth engine. I'm upbeat about India as a country, but it doesn't mean I'm going to buy every Indian stock that comes along because the market is already priced in that story. And when you're priced to deliver perfection, there's not much I can hope for as an upside, right?
Right, exactly.
Only bad things, only bad surprises can hang out there.
There's a fantastic line, which is that India disappoints both the optimists and the pessimists. And I think what you've captured is that exactly, right? That there's so much to be hopeful about, but still such a long way to go. And of course, I guess whether you're an optimist or pessimist determines that whether you complain about it or you see it as an opportunity, which obviously a lot of companies have, right? So infrastructure is such a large opportunity for many companies, and very large players entering that, in a big way.
I think technology changed the business game in India because for much of the 20th century, to be a successful business, you had to play the licensing game, right? The licensing game basically meant that family group companies started off at such a significant advantage that an entrepreneur was dead in the water. Technology started with a fresh slate. That's why if you look at the growth of India as an economy, you can trace it back to the Infosys, the kind of tech companies that took off. Because they did two things. One is they showed that entrepreneurs can get wealthy without the level of connection. I wouldn't say without connections. India is always about connections, but in the 20th century, the connections had to be family level connections, and you weren't born into the right family in a sense. It almost made it, that's change, and that's a good thing. No. And I think sometimes we forget how much has changed for the good because perspective, I mean, the advantage I have is I fly to India 1 week every year. The India I left in 1979 is still the India that frames references for me. So I can see the things that have changed, how they've changed for the better or the worse. I mentioned the traffic as being for the worse, but there are lots of things that have changed for the better. There are lots of things Indians should feel good about that have changed over the last 40 years. In the last 40 years, more people have been moved out of poverty in India than in the previous 2,000 years put together. Something fundamental changed in India. And I think that that's got to be celebrated, even as we start asking the question, what do we need to do better? I think we need to think about the things that have changed for the better.
I think you're right. The public digital infrastructure, for instance, like UPI and things like that, have just been. I mean, I know you've spoken about it. Absolutely incredible drivers of growth and just economic empowerment and.
But India should probably pay a dividend to Reliance Jio, every company, every Paytm, Zomato, because the smartphone has kind of released a lot of people from a lot of different constraints that they operated under. And it's something that governments need to factor in. The old days, the news was controlled, the information flow was very strictly regulated. So this is like riding the back of a tiger. As long as you're on the back, you feel pretty good, but be careful, the tiger might eat you.
Kind of reminds me of Bezos when he was talking about when he first started Amazon and how indebted he feels to, FedEx and UPS and the postal service, because until someone built that, there could have been no Amazon.
Yeah.
Exactly.
We stand on the shoulders of the giants who went before us, and in a sense, I think we underplay how much being at the right place at the right time is what created the great companies of today.